One of the things, of course, we love about Drucker Day, it's a great way for people to reconnect with old friends, and I can already feel the energy in the room as people are catching up with fellow students from years gone by. It's just a wonderful, wonderful day to celebrate the school and everything we do. I've got one additional a request actually to make before I introduce our next speaker. I believe we have about 12 prospective students in the room. Are you brave enough to put your hands up? Yeah, up the back, woo! All right, Team Drucker School, hunt them down, right? During lunchtime and spread the love and share the passion that we have for the Drucker brand. So great to see so many prospective students in the house. When you come to the Drucker School, you really do join the Drucker School family, and we roll together well. I'd like to now introduce one of my dear friends, Liz Edersheim. Liz has a PhD from MIT in operations research. I've looked at that a few times and thought, oh, okay, that's a good start. But more than that, she was a consultant and a partner at McKinsey, one of the first woman partners, I believe, at McKinsey, and continued after that and founded the New York consulting company. Liz also wrote a book called The Definitive Drucker in 2007, and is also, as I introduced other members this morning, is a member of my Drucker Global Coalition. Liz has become a great friend of mine and a great supporter of the school. What I quickly realized as dean is that part of my work is to talk and connect with Drucker alumni, but a big part of what I do is to connect with other people who had a relationship with Peter Drucker and for whom Peter Drucker's work impacted and influenced what they do in practice. And Liz has been tremendously supportive, as I've already said, as I came into this role. I'm 3 weeks shy of my 1-year anniversary as dean, if you'd like to just think that one is And every day I wake up, honestly, with a smile on my face at the privilege that I've been given to lead the Drucker School. It's a great privilege. But through the transition, Liz has reached out to me. She's been on the phone with me. I've met her in New York. She's opened up her connections and her network to me. And she's talked a lot about people who have been impacted by Peter Drucker's life. An incredibly generous person and a great friend. And so here to speak to you now is my good friend, Liz Edersheim. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here today. It's an honor to be here at Jenny's first Drucker Day. It's an honor to be here at Joe's award in his Lifetime Achievement. And it's an honor to be at Judy's co-award in Lifetime Achievement. And it's an honor to be with you. My topic is connecting the past with the future on the agenda, the path. Nobody did a better job than Peter Drucker at that. He had context in history, and he looked out the window and created tomorrow. And one of the tools he used to do that was he would always ask himself, what do I expect? And afterwards, what happened and where are there discontinuities or differences that create opportunities? He often would also ask himself, what do I hope? I'm going to spend a couple minutes on the what do I expect and then what do I hope. I remember sitting with these two and asking Peter, what did he expect? And he said, he had this humility. And it was in 2005, I believe, and he said he had no illusion about his legacy. In essence, he felt he would be lucky if in 10 years he was still footnoted in some management and social science literature. He believed there were certainly more important, impactful contributors than his. He hoped he helped a few people. I'll come to the hope in a few minutes. But boy, was he wrong about his legacy. And let me just spend a minute on why and try to get through this and give you some time back for a second. Large volume of work. I'll come back to these pieces in a second, just my photograph. But 1927, before 39, he began thinking about what was happening with Hitler. Just look at those work. By the way, in 1939, that was the year his first child, Kathleen, was born. 1942, his second child, Joan was born in 1946, third child, 49, fourth child. And Doris told him he should keep writing books, but she was done having kids. And it just, and he kept writing. He didn't stop. And I just again, against time, I'll try to flip through this rapidly. We talked about passion. His passion grew out of watching Europe collapse. What characterized him besides all that writing? He didn't predict. But look at all these things he invented. He invented strategy, he invented the knowledge worker. He never stopped inventing. Everything that's inside business today, and you talk to the leaders. Kotler said, no, I didn't invent marketing, that was Peter, strategy. The book Managing for Results, he first named that strategy, and the publisher told him, strategy is not a word business believes in. Innovation and entrepreneurship. He taught the first class in the country in innovation and entrepreneurship. And from that class, Psychology Today was born, DLJ was born, and a small steel mill fundamentally changed what they were doing in their approach from his first class on innovation and entrepreneurship. Everything. And how did he do it? He did it because he was concerned, he called himself a social ecologist, man's man-made environment. He studied it, he looked at it, he asked questions about it. And what made him a social ecologist? Business reality, communication, a deep sense of history, his courage, his interests, his attitude towards age. Do you know that I think it's 2/3 of his books he published after he was 65? Maybe it's something of that order. His last book came out with Joe after he had passed away. But he worked on it until then. He could synthesize, he could ask questions nobody else could ask. And there were 3 themes that really came through time and time again. This social consciousness, and I'm going to, again, try to go fast. The role of an organization as organs of society that make it possible for individuals to contribute more than they could individually, with 2 functions, and entrepreneurship can't be separated, and the effective executive. Knowledge, they ask what needs to be done, they act, and they're responsible and accountable. Pretty important today. And as he did this, he also impacted leaders all around the world. Andy Grove said Intel wouldn't have been in existence if Peter Drucker hadn't sat down with him. Margaret Thatcher said, she remembered the first time she met Peter. They had lunch. It was a 2-hour lunch, and she left that lunch, and she said, my to-do list was less than half as long as when I walked into that lunch. And it gave me the ability to focus in a way I never could have. And the list of people he influenced goes on and on. But I think, and this may be kind of my view, but he's also influencing inside the organizations that are changing the world today. I don't think there's an organization that he's more than 3 degrees away, of freedom away from. For example, Amazon. I had no clue there was any connection. About 18 months ago, I was at a meeting for a small foundation in New York, one-on-one school, and Mike Bezos is on the board. And he introduced himself to me. And he said, Mike is Jeff's father, he said, I have 2 of Peter's books. Oh. And then I said, I would think that Jeff could use a little more of Mike inside Amazon. And he said, quote, Peter invented after-action review when he worked with the Vietnam War Army. I don't even know if Peter did that. Did he? And Joe and Jeff has taken it and uses it every day inside Amazon. Let's just, Apple. Apple was built on a model to copy HP. Well, Peter worked with Hewlett and Packard at designing HP. Google, they have, I think it's 9 values. 4 of them were built from quotes by Drucker. Ultimate Guitar. I was out at Ultimate Guitar 3 weeks ago, and they grew from 7 million to 40 million over the last 7 years. And what happened was, do you guys know what Ultimate Guitar is? They're meant to be the Spotify of music, of sheet music. And their crowd is, if you go in a bar and you say, you know, you're from Ultimate Guitar, you'll get hugged by every guitar player. Nobody else will know who you are. And 7 years ago, the CEO and his number 2 guy were passionate about what they were doing, and they had a lot of other people there. And they said, but we're never going to grow if it's just the 2 of us. And they read every book they could get their hands on. And the 2 books that changed the company were The Effective Executives and Funky Business. The first thing they did, and they said they got this idea from Peter. Now, I don't know if this is really Peter's idea. They had breakfast they said, we like coming to work every day. Nobody else likes to come to work. How do we make them like to come to work? They created breakfast, great food for everybody from 8 to 9 in the morning. And programmers came at 8 in the morning. Chicago Museum of Art. I've got some nonprofits. Let's just talk about Chicago Museum of Art. About 10 years ago, our Chief Operating Officer, David Thurm, went there. And in every single meeting he attended, he said, what are the assumptions we need to challenge? And he did that until he left 4 months ago. They challenged, for example, what the guards say at 4:45. There's 15 minutes till closing. Now the guards say, it's 4:30, make sure you use your half hour to do what you want to do. They challenged what the art museum was. They now had, when Whistler's mother was on show, they had an Airbnb, a contest to stay in Whistler Mother's room that was modeled. You know, all of that stuff was outside of what an art museum could do. And they grew their membership, their visitors, not membership, 4 times faster than any other of the top 20 museums in the world when they started asking the Drucker questions. That's today, anybody. If you look at a great company or companies that are changing the world, I will guarantee Peter is there. That doesn't mean he shouldn't be there more, but he's there. Now let's talk about his hope. And we don't need to look at the letter for his hope, but in Adventures of a Bystander, he talked about how he and his father visited Schumpeter 5 days or 6 days before Schumpeter passed away. And I'll just read a couple paragraphs here. His father asked Schumpeter, Joseph, do you still talk about what do you want to be remembered for? And Schumpeter started laughing. For Schumpeter was notorious for having said when he was 30 and had published his first books that what he really wanted to be remembered for was having been Europe's greatest lover of beautiful women and greatest horseman. Schumpeter said, yes, this question is still important to me, but I now answer it differently. I want to be remembered as having been the teacher who converted 6 brilliant students into first-rate economists. I've reached that age where I'm answering the question a little differently. I have never forgotten that conversation. I learned 3 things. First, one has to ask oneself one wants to be remembered for. Second, that should change. And finally, one thing worth being remembered for is for the difference one makes in the lives of other people. Whenever I work with a person, I try to find out what the individual attributes his or her success for, and I'm invariably told stories that are remarkably like mine. The 3 people on the next panel are 3 people whose lives, including the curator, whose lives Peter touched, and who are role models for the future of Drucker in the future. They all remember the moment they met Peter. How many people do you remember the moment you met them? Like Margaret Thatcher, Andrew remembers his wife was working with Peter on a project. And Peter was humble when he met him. But Peter and Claremont shaped Andrew's life and his profession. His personal philosophy is built very much on Peter's need to make a difference and the importance of giving back. Pat met Peter when she walked into a classroom, and 3 hours later, not having been able to take her eyes off the lecturer who had no notes, she walked out feeling like she had just been in the presence of someone she would never again feel like that with. And Rudy, when he went into his class, he had to introduce himself, and Peter said, "I don't think what your business is doing makes sense." And over the course of the semester, the company was 20 years old, Summit Group, Peter began to be a little bit more complimentary. And as Rudy remembers, in his life, not just in his profession, he removes complexity, he develops people, and he fails gracefully. As Peter said, everyone will fail. Peter had relationships with all of them beyond that of a teacher, beyond that of a writer. Bernie doesn't need too much introduction if you're at the school. He teaches the most popular classes for the last 6 years, Drucker's great books and the practice of management. He lives Drucker. And when he teaches the practice of management, it's not as it was written in 1954, which was the first time the book came together, but as it is today. I just have a comment about that book for a second. When I was with Peter, I was talking to him about, what's wrong with business schools, blah, blah, blah. And he said when Michael Porter came out with Strategy, now remember, Peter invented Strategy. When Michael Porter came out with Strategy, every business school had to fit Strategy in their agenda. So they had to take something off their agenda. And what they took off was general management, which is what puts it all together. That's what he's teaching in the practice of management.
Actually, we have a number of our students actually from that class this fall. I'm not sure how many folks here read the practice of management this fall. There we go. We have, looks like about 20 or 30 hands, which is great. Good. There we go.
Andrew is on the board of advisors and is improving practices. He's had a life in Sun in HP and is vice president of finance and business operations at ServiceNow. But again, everything about Drucker goes through what he does and as he teaches and mentors other people. And Pat is dedicated to family businesses, which was also very much part of Peter's life. From the small Southern Plumbing, the two brothers that ran that stayed with Peter from probably his days at Bennington until past his death. But small businesses were always part of it. And Pat's helping the school, giving back to the school on that aspect of life. Rudy was responsible for the Small Business Association of Los Angeles and has changed many things about both finance and Los Angeles. And all of these people are disruptors. They're disruptors in what they do and how they do things, and they'll talk about that and how Peter's been part of their lives and their future, which is exactly what this is about.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. So I am just going to walk right down the row here and start off with Andrew. And the mission here is to talk a little bit about the impact of Peter's life on your life and to talk about any memories you may want to share about Peter.
Sure. So I think part of my participation here was actually the result of a trip up to Silicon Valley that Jenny and the professors brought up. And I was talking about our company, and for those of you who don't know, ServiceNow is an enterprise software company, and we focus on large enterprise companies, and basically we change the way they work. We take a look at their business processes and we re-engineer them, and that's basically what the foundations of our application does. And the thing that I was sharing with Jenny at the time was not only the history of our company and what we'd done, but that how Peter had actually influenced so much of the decisions and the processes and even the leadership that I have now in my company. And what really resonated with me was his focus on customer centricity. And the fact of the matter is, in the enterprise software space today, SaaS is revolutionizing the way in which we operate. It's changing the dynamics, and it's really putting the customer at the forefront and choosing how they implement business-critical technologies and the way they consume it. And I would tell you that as I've grown at ServiceNow, we've grown from when I started, we were just about a $500 million company a year, and we're now well on our way to a $4 billion company by the time we hit 2020. And as part of that evolution and growth, I was asked to take on our pricing strategy. And it was one of these jobs that you look at and you've seen that the prior individuals failed miserably. And it was because I think they lacked the real context of not a product-centric or technology-centric focus, but rather one that was centered around what we were delivering to the customer and the value they were getting from that. And I would tell you that as I started to absorb those new responsibilities, I was reflective of some of the things that Peter had taught. And I will tell you, today, I still have one of his articles he wrote in the Wall Street Journal, and it continues to resonate with me every day of my life and my career, and that was the 5 deadly business sins. And I will tell you a little bit more about them, but the fact of the matter is that it has a real root in pricing. And as I was thinking about our pricing strategy, I reflected on those principles, and I started developing what our own core principles were. And in the SaaS world, we have to think a little differently about how we deliver things to customers. But the 4 were basically this. First was incent adoption, and in the world of SaaS, one of the better proxies for customer value is how much they use your product. So what a notion, let's go actually incent customers to use more. The second notion was this of fair value exchange. And in Peter's principle, he talks about the worship of high profit margins and high pricing as one of the deadly business sins. And I thought about that, and I said, that's not where we want to be. We want to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace with respect to how we offer our services to customers, and we want that fair value exchange. The next major principle is we got to keep it simple. Because if customers don't understand how they're using our service and can't translate that into value via simplistic pricing methodology, then they're going to invariably become dissatisfied with how the pricing disparity is versus their value. And Peter centers a lot on that in his principles as well, is that you don't charge what the market is going to bear, you charge what is a fair value. And that led me to the last one, which is, that is in SaaS, and I talked about having that adoption, but transparency and understanding of what that usage is establishes trust with our customers. And for us, the notion of a customer is long beyond the sale. It's one that, we used to say it was at least 10 years long, and I think it's more like 25 years long. And that's the mentality that we have within our company and our executive team, that we're developing customers. We're in the business of developing customers and understanding what their needs are and providing a level of service that is value in their eyes. And I will tell you that every day I think about that major mission and how it relates back to the teachings I received here at Claremont.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you. So what I'd like to do is just walk through each of the individual speakers and then come back, and if we have time, to actually open the floor for a little bit of a conversation. So Rudy, I would love to hear your thoughts about your interaction with Peter, principles he took away, and how it impacted your life.
Well, I met Peter in the late 90s, and just to correct a little bit of what Liz said about my background, I was head of the Small Business Administration 30 years ago. It's not something of recent time. And I started the company from then and had it for about 20 years, and I took Peter for several classes. And he was very critical of the company. He said, it's never going, I didn't tell him how long I'd had the company. He says, it's never going to make it. And I said, well, Peter, I says, it's going on its 19th year. And he said, well, there's always exceptions to the rule. And he says,
just wait, right? Just wait. Just wait, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So he said, but you should look at perhaps transitioning out of that and getting into another venue, and I'll come back to that. Of recent, I head the board of directors of East West Bank, which is the largest Asian bank in the country. We're at about $34 billion in assets with offices throughout the country, throughout Asia. And a lot of what Peter has brought to me, and I've captured in a few notes that I'll share maybe later if we have time, was the fact that although he was he could be very cerebral, he could be a very strong academic. What I appreciated most is that he reduced things to the lowest common denominator. He made things very simple, very sage advice, the type of advice where you say, I should have thought of that. So taken away, that's what I got from Peter right off the top.
Right. And I'm going to come back to you on those principles, because it looks like you've done your homework here, Rudy. So, but Pat, what were your kind of top of mind reflections on Peter?
Well, I actually took Peter's Innovation and Entrepreneurship class in fall of '85, which seems like a very long time ago, and it is. I actually kept my book for this. I went back and looked at my book, and I probably have highlighted something on every single page and paper clipped other pages. So, but my experience was amazing. When I walked into the room, it was probably 50 students. I'd heard a little bit about his reputation, so I thought, well, I'm going to sit in the back, and then he won't call on me. Well, that was totally naive on my part, because he called on everybody all the time. And I remember distinctly the first day of class, he said, okay, you all need to go home tonight and start writing your paper, because you will rewrite it at least 7 times before it's going to be good enough for me. Well, I went home that night and I started writing my paper, and I actually looked for my paper. I don't have it anymore, so I'm not sure what I wrote about, but I remember being so intimidated by him, but I got to meet with him after class, because I thought, I'm going to get an A in this class, so I better spend time with him. And he was so kind and so friendly, and it was a great experience. So I have learned a lot in that class. I learned a lot from him, and I've applied that in my business. And so to give you a little bit more background is, I am in what's called the family office industry. It's a very small industry. There's probably 5,000 family offices across the United States. We handle all the personal financial affairs of ultra-high net worth individuals. And I've been doing that for over 30 years. I had my own business, and I built that business over the course of 20 years, and I've since sold it. How I got in this business is I started with the Marshall Field family of Chicago. I worked for Marshall's brother, Ted. And then as I said, I built my own business before it even had an industry. So I said, well, let me see. Working for one person is very confining, even though he was an amazing person and we had lots of businesses and lots of interest. I want to diversify and work for more than one family, and that is now called the multifamily office. So the industry emerged. I realized in the 2006-07 time period, once again, I think learning from Peter about innovation and entrepreneurship, that the industry was changing. I needed succession. I needed to be part of something bigger. More importantly, my family's, this business is a legacy business, generation after generation. So I needed to be prepared for all of those generations for my clients, and my talent needed a longer career path, a broader career path. And the industry, and I'm happy to talk about this at length, but I believe our industry is going through a transformation driven a lot by millennials. And so I really felt the business model has to change. And one of the things that, is one of Peter's principles is understand your mission and your purpose. Our mission and purpose is really simple. It's called handle all the personal financial affairs of an ultra-high net worth individual, whatever that involves. And so you may appreciate that requires very high-skilled individuals, very highly credentialed people, very educated people, and the solutions for these families are very complex and complicated. So back to this, change that occurred. I really believed in order for that, my business and small multifamily offices and single-family offices, which serve, just as its name suggests, one family, I needed to be part of something bigger in order to scale. The industry now is about scale and delivering all those services to families. And so I sold my firm in January of 2009 to GenSpring, which is one of the largest MFOs in the country. I'm actually stayed on as their managing director, and now I'm a consultant, which is hopefully can end here soon, because I think I put in enough time. And I'll just quickly, I'll quickly add that I have another business. It's a lobbying business. Yes, I am one of those terrible lobbyists in Washington, D.C. I lobby on tax reform, so this was a really, really big and important busy week. And the reason I got involved in that is because I had a family member client die at the young age of 38, and her mother died 5 years later. And so I got involved in what's called the estate tax, sometimes called the death tax. And so I've been trying to educate legislators around the tax and reform, and hopefully maybe someday repeal it in a prudent economic manner. And so I'm in DC about a week a month, and as you can see, the synergies between those two businesses, and that's why I'm helping Jenny with the Family Business Institute here. I'm very, very excited about it because I work with hundreds of family businesses across the United States. And I think the distinction in what she's trying to do here with the Family Business Institute is make it an international family business institute. And I work with a lot of these family business centers. There is none like that around the country or around the world. So kudos to Jenny for thinking about it and coming up with this strategy. And sorry if I've been a little long.
No, that's absolutely great, Pat. That's absolutely great. I'm going to come back to each of you and ask about this issue of continuity and change, and what does it mean in the software as a service sector? What does it mean in financial services? What does it mean for family business? So we'll talk about continuity and change. But before I go there, I want to put Rudy back on the spot here for a second, related to some of the principles that you have taken away as you think about Drucker's work and the impact of his work on your career and how you think about things in the context of your business.
Well, banking has changed considerably. In fact, it's not the same. It kind of recreates itself every 4 or 5 years to the point where you almost lose sight of where you're at in any one particular time. And what I think that I've taken away from Drucker's, and I put some points here that I wrote backstage here. In dealing with leadership as head of the board of directors, you carry a major responsibility, not only fiduciary, but legal responsibilities as well. And that, I remember he always saying, make certain that those who are subordinate to you know what you need and what you need to accomplish. Otherwise, you're going to be herding cats. And in dealing with the type of industry that we're in, highly regulated and changing all the time, very, very competitive. And we're, as I said, we're about $35 billion in assets. And we're still a relatively small bank compared to Wells Fargo and Bank of America. So we need to be on our toes because the interest margins are so compressed, it's becoming so competitive as the entire industry is. So.
Okay, so continuity and change. What I'd love to hear, and I'm just gonna allow you to kind of self-select on this particular one, but how does Peter's concept of continuity and change, of competing in a sense, you know, back in 1954, he made the argument that great managers compete in 2 time periods. They compete in the present and they compete in the future. And that's really continuity and change at some level is about that. How do I manage to run my current business while at the same time, I guess in today's lingo, actually looking at it from a blue ocean perspective? So how do I create the space to be able to compete in the future? And how do I manage that critical issue of managing in 2 time periods, managing in the present and the future? Drucker made the argument that most senior executive teams should spend 10 to 20% of their time thinking about the future and planning for the future and creating the future as a center of gravity of what they do. But we all know that the pressure of short-term demands force out that long-term thinking, and basically 99% of the time is spent dealing with the present. So I'm curious what continuity and change means for each of you as you think about your industry sector that you compete in. And I'm staring at all of you very actively. And okay, I'll start with you here, Rudy, to kick us off. Then I'll go Pat, and then I'll come back to Andrew.
You know, historically, it was good enough just to assess the horizon. In banking now, you have to be able to look around corners to predict what's going to happen. It's very, very difficult. Service is a number one proponent of maintaining and sustaining business. And I think that Peter was always a very people-oriented, having a strong skill set of dealing with people, especially dealing with foreign countries. And now, we used to study about globalization. Globalization's been here for decades. And now we have to read the tea leaves of what they're looking at in terms of competition. And it's becoming increasingly difficult.
I can see that. Pat, what are your thoughts?
As I mentioned, the family office industry is part of the wealth management industry, and it is really going through a transformation. There's a lot of things driving that. One is, people have figured out that the margins are in the investments, and so if you deliver this other stuff, and in the family office industry, that would be accounting, taxes, insurance, bill pay, estate planning, philanthropic management. Think of it as one-stop shopping for the ultra-high net worth family. Or for any family, but the economics only work for ultra-high net worth. So the industry is now, a lot of firms are calling themselves family office so they can gather those assets, and they're trying to down-market the business, and that is really not working. At the same time, and so, as I said, a lot of wealth management firms are calling themselves family office, and so the field is getting very, very muddy, and it's going through this major change that it hasn't gone through in 30 years. On top of that, it started in the 90s for all practical purposes. Many of those family office executives are retiring, and so they're rethinking, do I need that role? Do I need a family office? And the millennials is probably the biggest factor that is changing the way that wealth management firms have to look at what they are doing currently. It is the biggest disruptor there is. And so millennials, as we all know, they're very different from us baby boomers, right? They prefer to do things themselves. They're not about things, they're about experiences. And so what's happening in the wealth management industry is that they are used to delivering their product to a baby boomer, doing everything for them, from paying their bills to doing their taxes. Millennials pay their own bills online. They do their taxes with tax software. And oh, by the way, they're not going to sit in a conference room with a PowerPoint presentation and listen to you for an hour. They're going to want 24/7 access on their phone, and they'll call you when they need you. So the and I've been speaking a lot about this because I speak about trends in the industry. The wealth management firm they're just ignoring the millennials. And I think it's a huge mistake because there's trillions, depending on the number of trillions, depends on who you talk to, is changing hands from boomers to millennials. And if the wealth management firms in this world don't get behind the different way to market, the different service, what that customer values, which is very, very different, and Peter focused on that, is what is your customer value? The wealth management firm is going to be in for a really, really big surprise, and it's going to start to evaporate on them. So I don't see a lot of firms addressing that right now. So and in that note, other industries that relate to wealth management, like the real estate industry, is focusing on millennials, right? Millennials are not going to be buying these large estates and large homes. They don't care about that. Again, they're not about things. They're going to want small communities where they have convenience around shopping, where they have convenience around restaurants and mixing with their friends and communications. And so you'll see a lot of real estate industries, and this relates to wealth management because people invest in real estate in the wealth management industry. They're developing different product because they're seeing their customer different. They're seeing what their customer values different. So again, that's a big change.
Well, it also sounds like industry borders are becoming kind of much more ambiguous in terms of who's playing with what, who's going after that particular market, how are they going after it, what technology are they using, whether it's software-based or whether it's face-to-face, and who's actually providing that service may not come from the traditional provider. So it's a really interesting evolution of the industry. So Andrew, you're in software as a service. That is probably one of the most high buzz topics we could be talking about. You can't go wrong, I guess, talking about software as a service. So I'm curious, when you think about this particular space of how you play, and obviously, we've got great examples of folks like Salesforce.com and other people that have kind of figured out pricing models and figured out ways of going. You've mentioned your business has migrated from 500 million to 4 billion, so you've cracked the code on sort of business process. But I'm curious, okay, so let's assume we're running well now. When we think about this change, 3, 4, 5, 6 years in the future, what's What's going on? What's keeping you awake? What's happening in the space?
I don't think you could have teed up it better than if you threw me a fastball right down the middle. So I think they...
By the way, that's in Los Angeles, that's a very difficult topic to talk about, is baseball these days. As I'm thinking, yeah, that's like that fastball, yeah, that's a Yu Darvish fastball. It was not a Clayton Kershaw fastball. That's a very specific reference, so okay.
Well, let me tell you, one of the things that I mentioned, ServiceNow is focused on providing services to large enterprise. And that is really about business processes where humans are involved. So our direct thought process is how we deliver services to the human element within a large enterprise. And most everybody's heard about the Internet of Things, and they maybe understand it a little bit, but I would tell you that we're thinking about it in real time as those are our new customers. And what I mean by that is that we're going to be providing levels of services to anything with a digital heartbeat that is connected to a network, that can communicate back and forth, that has rules engines about how they operate. And I would tell you that we're starting those thought processes and how we build our pricing models, our products, and those types of things. But it's a journey, and I'm going to go backwards, and I will tell you, I'll share with you the experience I had that is forming my thought process around this today. When I first joined Sun Microsystems, I was a brand new MBA, and I had the great opportunity to be in our investor relations department. And I had this also great opportunity to take Bill Joy, what many people refer as the Edison of the internet, and I had a chance to take him to investors. And I said, okay, Bill, we're going to talk about how Java is revolutionizing the way and disintermediating PC application providers. And he stopped me, he says, Andrew, you don't get it. And I said, well, what do you mean, Bill? We got to make sure these investors understand the value of Java. That's why they're investing in Sun Microsystems. He said, Andrew, let's take a step back. Imagine a world where bandwidth isn't a limitation, where anything and everything has a microprocessor and invariably has the ability to communicate over the internet. And we can put applications on those microprocessors. And we can effectively communicate with them. Can you imagine the amount of data we'd have? Do you imagine the amount of business processes we could change? And he said, and I kept thinking, what are you talking about? You're going to have to ground this somewhere. And he saw it, and he said, okay, what's in Japan? On every street corner. Vending machines. Yes, that's right. And how do you think those vending machines companies actually manage their inventory, their pricing, their logistics, their fulfillment? How do you think they do that? Paper. They go out and do inventory, they record it down, they bring it back. What if we put a Java virtual machine and a microprocessor on every vending machine, connected it to the network, collected that data? Do you think that the companies that manage those might change their business practices? They might drive to a more efficient process of stocking, managing, pricing? Do you think that might happen? Yeah, it did. And so I would tell you that when we think about providing services to our customers, today we're certainly understanding about how they're managing their business and trying to automate their business processes and helping them move from what was a very rote process to one that is more digital. It's a digital transformation we're taking them on. But I will tell you that last year around this time in San Jose, we had a lot of rain and we had a big flood. And the problem was that the Santa Clara Valley Water District didn't have good monitoring management of their flood control systems or their valves. And so I will tell you today, we are working with them on tests about how we better enable them to put that digital heartbeat on their valves and flood control systems so they can better manage their business process. That is Internet of Things. That is transformation of business process. That is customer value. And so now it's upon us to figure out how do we replicate that for every other customer that's going through a similar type of digital transformation and provide them value in a way that we have those core principles intact.
Oh, that's great. That's a great, great story. I know we're kind of up against the time here, so I'm just curious about any other commentary. I don't want to lead the witness here. The issue, I was going to ask a question around people and managing people and how to think about human assets. And the wonderful thing about Drucker is he has this phrase where when you think about human resources, you can treat them as humans, you can treat them as resources, and it's a very different framing depending on how you're thinking about them. But I'm curious, you could talk about the nature of how you think about human assets and resources, Or you could take a different theme, wherever you kind of want to end it. But we have time for kind of one more comment from each of our panelists, and I would just love to hear your thoughts. And Rudy's leaning forward, so I'm reading the tea leaves here, Rudy. So why don't you kick us off?
No, I think in the spirit of Peter Drucker, I find that probably the largest, the biggest challenge I see is for educational institutions. They're saddled with the responsibility of having to train young students for jobs that don't even exist today, industries that don't even exist today. And what do? Competition is so keen from other foreign countries that are waiting to hand us our lunch. We're facing a situation where this next generation probably will have a lower net worth than parents have had. And is the experience one that we focus more on investment of students, or do we let them go ahead with their plans, or do we try to set into motion, try to predict how do we forecast where we need to have student resources, human resources placed in the future? Very, very compelling issue when you stop to think about that.
That's great. Excellent. Pat.
So I'd like to close with two comments, two quotes from Peter. The first one, I don't know where I don't know if it's in a book or I heard him say it or what, but I have said it my entire life, and that is, he says, bright people have bright ideas, but people with tenacity get the job done. And I feel that's me, because I'm not an exceptionally bright person, but I think I have a lot of tenacity. And believe me, in Washington, D.C., you better have a lot of tenacity. You're going to get nothing done. So I feel I like that. And the other is a quote, actually, from his book, and he says, entrepreneurship is not a personality trait, it's a behavior. And again, I can relate that to myself, because when I started in business, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. It just kind of happened. When I left the Field family, I thought, okay, well, my vision is I'm going to work for more than one family. Well, okay, I guess I need to form a business to do that. And then I had a situation in 1996 where I was kind of thrown into the situation, and I said, I'm going to buy this other company, and I guess I'm an entrepreneur. And so I think that's really important for people to focus on is, while we call people entrepreneurs and say, oh, well, you can tell he's an entrepreneur. I mean, I make that mistake myself. It really is a learned behavior. And I think that's important because it means we can all be entrepreneurs. We can all learn. And so, again, it's one of my favorite sayings.
Excellent. Great. Andrew, last comment?
Yeah, so maybe one last comment. Something really struck me about what Renee was talking about was how we need to motivate people better, how you get them more involved when you have these transformations. And I would tell you, one of the things that I do religiously is I hire for it. And so there are two key questions I ask people when I'm interviewing them. First is, what are you passionate about, and what are you most proud of? And if I don't get the level of engagement that exudes their interest in accomplishment, in tenacity, in perseverance, they're likely not going to be on my team. Because I can teach them a lot of things if they have those two key qualities.
That's great. And actually, it's kind of interesting. There's a new book out called Grit, which is your notion of tenacity here, around the importance of that as a kind of, and it relates to them to passion and what it is that motivates people and so forth. And how do you find organizational positions that unleash that particular passion in kind of the right direction of where the organization kind of needs to go? So I want to kind of, before we close here, I just want to give a quick round of applause to our panelists here today. The Drucker School runs well when we have alumni that are deeply committed and spend their Saturdays and time with us, helping direct the school, shape the school. And so these three people are people that are actually engaged with the school at a very deep level and are providing advice to Jenny and the team moving forward, and have a long, rich history of helping the school, which is we're incredibly appreciative of. So thank you.